Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football.
Hey, Seahawk fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers here to talk mock draft. We're going to do another mock draft after we went through the free agency process for the most part. We had one big player sign yesterday that I think everyone probably knows about that kind of impacted what we would do in the drafts potentially. Bobby Wagner came back on a one-year deal. Reported at $7 million, but I can pretty much guarantee you that it's probably a $4 million guarantees with $3 million in incentives. I would imagine to get him back into the fold, and it's good news, I think, for the Seahawks on the whole. I think there's a camp that says that Bobby's washed and whatnot, can't make the plays he used to.
Did they watch him play last year?
He played fantastic last year, and he brings so many other intangibles to the table for the Seahawks in a year where I think they really need that to kind of take that next level.
Bobby's not washed. What he is slow. In the past, he was one of the fastest linebackers in the NFL. But, all the years of playing at all pro level have taken their toll on his knees, and he doesn't have the speed he used to. That doesn't make him washed. He still was like third in the NFL in tackles last year, playing for the Rams. He's still incredibly instinctive. He still gets up near the line of scrimmage to make plays. He still does a lot of things really well. He just doesn't have the speed he used to. That's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not asking him to be in his prime Bobby Wagner here. We're asking him to be a team leader and someone that they can trust to run the defense and call the plays defensively, wear the green dot and do things and just be consistent, play good. So I think that with that, they get what they need. And I should point out right now that you nailed this contract exactly as you predicted. 1 year, $7 million. It's going to be it's going to be a smaller number with incentives to try and push the cap stuff out. Like you predicted this exactly about a week before it happened. So,
just looking at some of the other contracts for the middle linebackers out there, I can't remember the guy's name. Do you, by any chance, recall the contract I was?
Levante David.
Yeah,
in Tampa.
Yeah, Levante David signed a $7 million deal with Tampa with $3 million in incentives, and I was thinking, man, that's exactly where Bobby Wagner's going to have to come in if he wants to get signed. And sure enough, that's kind of the way the market dictated it, and I really appreciate the patience of John Schneider. I mean, let's talk about John Schneider for a minute. In 2 consecutive off seasons, just completely has done a tremendous job, I think, as a general manager overall, managing the cap, managing the roster building, roster building strategy and so forth. And with still the draft to play out, just really reimagined this team and this roster moving forward. And I think he's just done a great job. Now, with that said, we still have a few holes as we approach the draft. I would imagine they'll try to sign some minimum deals, maybe bring in a run stuffing type at defensive tackle at the nose. But that would be the one remaining glaring hole I think that the team has. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I still also think they need a long-term solution at middle linebacker because Bobby's back on a 1-year deal. They signed Bush as a 1-year deal. Those are their draft hedges. And the fact that Brooks is injured with a late season ACL. So he'll be back some point, but maybe not right away. I think they need a long-term middle linebacker in the mix. They don't have to be ready to play with week 1 because you've got the 2 guys. They don't have to be ready to play this year, but they need to be starter caliber a year from now.
I think the
And
team is not completely counting on Devin Bush to be like all world at all.
oh no,
He's
not at
coming in
all.
to be, his contract dictates that he's coming in to compete for that spot. And if they draft a guy at the top of the draft that's intended to be a starter, Devin Bush is like that third linebacker guy and probably doesn't even see the field and might not make it out of camp, only because of the amount of time that linebackers are on the field in this defense.
Yeah.
And there just
Well,
wouldn't be any room for him to play. And I just don't know that it would be of value for him to be on the team at that point.
I don't have it.
Especially,
I don't have it up where I can look at it, but if memory serves, his entire like $2.1 million contract is guaranteed. So I think he makes the roster, but he's going to.
I don't think so. Let me look it up. Devin Bush. Yeah. So it's a $3.5 million deal. 3 million of it is guaranteed. So that would be dead money. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Cap savings of $500,000 basically.
So I think he makes the roster as a third linebacker.
So, but you would have if you drafted let's just say you drafted a linebacker early, Sanders or somebody else, DeHalen Henley, you would have Bobby Wagner, Bush, Brooks, possibly ready to go, but maybe starts the year on IR, and then your draft pick. I mean, obviously that's way better depth than we had last year, kind of attack that position, but you'd have to make a decision, about halfway through the year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing is you could make that decision and cut Bush when Brooks is ready, but I think you keep him on the roster until Brooks is ready.
Or you
and if
flip
you
him for a late round pick.
Yeah. And if you think that, if you think that the room is loaded at linebacker, wait until we're done with this draft, mock draft, because it changes drastically between now and the end of the show. So,
well, it does for you. On mine, funny enough, I didn't select a linebacker as it turned out.
Interesting.
Crazy.
Let's jump into this because these things can sometimes take a little bit, and I want us to.
So why don't you set us up with the rules, and then I can break them.
So the rules for this one were, our typical rule of 2 trades and or less, and trying to set it up no early round quarterback. And I know it's still likely. I think that Seattle takes a quarterback if they're a first round one. If there's one of the top 4 drop and is there at 5. But I've done that every time we've done a draft, and I'm like, okay, what if we don't? What if Seattle isn't in the market for a quarterback? I think they should be, but what if they aren't? How does the draft fall differently when you're taking people at other positions? You have other needs at different points in the draft. Those were our 2 rules. And why don't you start us off with pick number 5?
So at pick number 5, I did not trade the pick because there's 2 players in the draft that I would stay at 5 for, CJ Stroud and Will Anderson. Will Anderson was off the board, but sure enough, CJ Stroud was there, and I broke the first rule that we had, the only rule really that we had in this draft. And I chose CJ Stroud at pick number 5 for the Seahawks because I disagree with your premise so much that I was willing to break the rules on this show. I do believe that Seattle is going to be looking at quarterback, especially if Stroud is sitting there at 5.
Oh, I agree.
The contract with Geno Smith does not preclude them from drafting a quarterback, A, and B, if it's Stroud, given the hype that he had on his pro day and just around his season and the type of person that he is and all the attributes, the Seahawks would be running up to the microphone to make that pick at 5 if it's CJ Stroud.
Agreed. But yet again, we set rules, and then you break those rules.
We sure did, and I did. Yeah, absolutely. I'm guilty as charged.
That's been a running trend since we started the show like 6 years ago.
7 years now.
God, 7 years ago. All right, so I traded away 5, in part because if you're not taking a quarterback there, and I was trying to stay away from Jalen Carter, 1, because we've done that draft before, and 2, his legal stuff and his actual issues and stuff that had to gain 9 pounds in 2 weeks between the combine and pro day. And it's just, there's a lot of red flags. And I'm like, I'm not going to go there. I'm not taking a quarterback at 5. So that means I'm trading back. And I traded all the way back to 11 because it got me pick 41 and a 7th round pick, where the Seahawks don't have, they do have a pick now, but they could use those picks are cheap. They're throw-ins, and I think they help in terms of getting you those priority undrafted free agent guys. So you can just pick them and go with it. So, but yeah, it got me another 2nd round pick. And at 11, I went in a direction that I did not see myself going, and that was Joey Porter Jr., cornerback out of Penn State. Absolutely elite prospect at cornerback. Put him opposite Tariq Woolen, and don't think twice about it. I'm sorry, Michael Jackson, but you've been good. You've been steady. You just got replaced and
upgraded.
And
wow,
that's just that to me.
That would be a shocker, but
player.
Yeah,
right?
Here's the deal, Keith. Right at 5 now. Seahawk fans hate it when we drop back, and we're going to have a draft strategy show after this show. And there are scenarios where you've got Will Anderson's off the board. We already took Jalen Carter off our own board, and the 2 or 3 quarterbacks that the Seahawks might be interested in are off the board, and they don't like Tyree Wilson, let's say. Okay, so there's a scenario where it only makes sense for Seattle, rather than reach for a player or draft a player that's completely unneeded for whatever reason at that spot, they would need to drop back. And, you ideally want to drop back a few spots, but sometimes it makes sense, depending on what you pick up for draft capital, to drop back into that range. And you're going to end up taking the best player available on your board. And there are scenarios, if Gonzalez is there, or Joey Porter, or Quentin Johnson, if they think that's an option out there, a number of other players, then there's a scenario where we could draft a corner. They haven't drafted a corner that high before, but it doesn't preclude them from doing that if they can upgrade the position. And they certainly can with this player. I mean, he's one of my favorite players in the draft. He's just short of 200 pounds, but 6'2", great ball skills, very athletic, in all the testing. He's shown that, and very sticky in coverage. I think it's a great pick.
Yeah. I mean, it's a pick where that doesn't necessarily match Seattle's needs. And that's why people will, I think, hate it, but I think they'll really like the player. Yeah. And, when you're picking, that high in the draft, you better be getting guys that can be Pro Bowl guys for a long time. And I think Joey Porter is that. Interesting.
Wow. Okay. So I traded out of 20. What'd you do?
I stayed at 20, and I picked Quentin Johnson, the wide receiver out of TCU. Guy's 6'4" with speed for days. Basically, you put him on the field with Metcalf, and you're going to see defensive coordinators just rage quit, because that much size, that much speed, that much talent on the outside with both guys, and it's going to make for an impossible situation for opposing defenses. And the fact that he was there at 20 made that a really easy pick. Again, not necessarily a need, because the Seahawks have their top 2 receivers in Metcalf and Lockett. But Johnson is another elite prospect. I like him on the outside. Lockett can then come in and play in the slot, and you just have 3 guys. You have 3 guys now that are elite playmakers, and you can't go wrong with that.
Yeah, no, I agree. On my board, when I did my draft, Najigba and Addison came off the board first as the 2 receivers off the board. For me, I think Quentin Johnson is the best wide receiver in this class. Just based on upside. Now he's got a little bit to go as far as route running, all that kind of stuff, understanding the intricacies. He played for TCU, very pass happy in their offense and so forth. We'll see how he adapts and fits in, but immediately comes in and competes for the third spot and probably wins that easily. And eventually can work himself up to the number one wide receiver, whether it's within our roster or somebody's roster. And I think it's a great pick. I went in a similar route in that I traded back off of 26, picked up pick number 58 with Dallas, and also a 2024 fourth round pick. And at 26, I picked Quentin Johnson as well. Yeah. One of my favorite prospects in the draft. I had my choices of Zay Flowers was also off the board at that point. So I could have either gone Bijan Robinson, clearly the best player, I think, on my board. Probably everybody's board was still sitting there. Quentin Johnson, Dalton Kincaid, and others. And I just felt like it was the best upside for us. We already had a premier running back on our roster. So I didn't need to go spend that necessarily. And as far as positional value, I thought Johnson offered the upside there that I went with.
Yeah. So after that, our next pick was 37. And at this point, I had felt like the draft had gotten away from me. I had gotten a wide receiver and a cornerback, two things that I did not go into this draft wanting. I mean, great to get and improve the talent at those positions, but I wanted guys in the trenches, offensive line, defensive line, edge players, linebackers.
You and me both, really. I mean, I went with quarterback and then wide receiver. It's like, I did not intend for that to happen, but that's just the way the board worked.
And then at 37, I was very, very happy to see Mazi Smith, the giant athlete. He's like 330 pound, like uber athlete out of Michigan, sitting there. He can be your nose tackle. He can be your three tech. He's big enough to be a nose tackle, athletic and quick enough to be a three tech. And the fact that he was sitting there at 37 made me really happy, because that really kind of fixed the issue that I had in round one where I didn't get needs. So Mazi Smith was my pick at 37.
Nice. I love that pick. A great player. I hope he's one of the players I'd love to come out of the draft with for sure. At 37, the native pick, Mazi Smith went 34 to the Cardinals before me. That was off the board. This is where I felt like things were going to kind of get away from me. But turns out Osiris Torrance was sitting there at 37. There were earlier mocks where we kind of had him going into the back of the first round, or even at pick 20 as a consideration. Mm-hmm. I thought at this point in the draft, it's a good value, the best run blocking interior offensive lineman in the draft. He's got to work on a few things, but at that point, the upside with him on the interior, where we clearly have a need, was it. So that was my pick at 37.
Yeah, best pure guard in the draft. It all comes down to whether Skoronski moves inside or not. But if someone decides to take him as a tackle, then that makes Torrance the best guard in the draft, and you just got him. That's a great pick. Love that pick. At 41, which is part of what I got by trading back in round one, I went with Adetomiwa Adabarwe. Oh. I probably butchered that. He's an edge rusher out of Northwestern, 280 pounds. We're not talking like speedster that comes around the edge. We're talking about in a 3-4, he's your 5 tech, right? He's got the guy that's going to play at first backup Dre Jones, but then, as rotations happen, he'll get on the field for probably about 40% of the snaps there. And, if injuries happen, he'll get more playing time than that. But this guy's, kind of pure athlete, very much Dre Jones like, but younger. And that's a perfect person for him to learn under, and just good power upfield, explosive interior pass rusher in this 3-4. They need more bodies on the line. And so with two straight picks for only 4 picks apart, I went with defensive line.
I love this. I love this pick. And here's the value of trading back in the draft and picking up additional value. This is what happens. And this is the kind of player that could be an addition to the roster that I think gives the idea of trading back its merit. This guy's runs a 4.49 40 at 282 pounds, probably can play up to at 290. So he's a little shorter, a little less length than you'd like to have him, but he's still got almost 34-inch arms, Keith. But ran a 1.61 split at that size, and a 4.26 shuttle. And just amazing player, probably one of the best, most athletic guys on the field at the combine. With just that much upside, it's a great pick for Seattle. I love that pick. All right, so are we at 52?
Yep.
So 52. So you have a native pick at 52. I also have a pick at 52. I'll go ahead. John Michael Schmitz, the offensive lineman from Minnesota, is going to play center right away. Best offensive center prospect in the draft. That's the consensus. I like him in as far as a scheme fit for Seattle, is able to get to the second level, but stout enough to play the interior defensive lineman in the NFC West as good as you can. And so I love that pick. I know that we brought a guy in to hold down the fort prior to the draft, and that's kind of all he did. And now he steps aside and becomes kind of our interior swing guy that can play three different positions. And Schmitz is the guy going forward for years, hopefully.
Well, then you're going to really like my pick at the native pick at 52, because it was also John Michael Schmitz for all the reasons that you just said. Instant starter. And not only that, but a 10-year starter. He's one of my favorite prospects in this draft.
I think it's one of everyone's favorite prospects in the draft. That's why, if we get him, it's going to be great. But there's also probably 10 other teams that are going to want to be drafting him. And so we'll see how that goes. It might push him up is what I'm saying. At 52, it is unlikely that John Michael Schmitz is sitting there. There are other teams that have been talking about getting him at the back of the first round.
He'll go in the 30s, whether it be 31, 32 in the first round or 38, 39 in the second round.
Or teams will be moving up. Yeah. Or teams might be like day 2, the first pick comes on the board and you're on the clock. You might have some activity there for to go up and get a guy like this for sure.
There's no way he's there in the 50s, but this is a mock, and he was available, so I took him.
The other thing I'll say is we're using NFL Mock Draft Database, which does an accumulation on their big board of all the big boards that are out there on the internet, basically. And so it does give you a pretty decent idea of how big boards are kind of lined up. Now, it might not be Seattle's big board. They do, and every team does a different big board and so forth. But from all the information that we have, it's the best one that we've got. All right, 58 with the trade that I had with Dallas earlier from moving down from 20, I picked up 58. I chose cornerback Julius Brents out of Kansas State. Just an upside player, scheme diverse. He's a cover press corner if you want him to be, with the size and length that he's got, along with the speed. He can also come inside for you and play close to the line of scrimmage as a safety if you wanted him to. And he's got the length and size to do that. And he loves to tackle. Pete's going to love a player like that. I think this is a guy that immediately comes and pushes, our number 2 corner job, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah. I like him as basically a guy that can shift between safety and corner, big enough to play on the outside at corner, shifty enough to cover in the slot, fast enough to play free safety. And I love that pick. That's just a fantastic pick. And again, like you said earlier, this is the advantage of moving back when you do it in round 1, because without that trade from 20 to 26, you don't get this player.
From there too, you go from 52 to 83. Yeah, as native picks go, and so there's a big drop there with a ton of talent. So it'd be nice to have another ticket to pull between 30 and 80 if Seattle can work that way, they come out of the draft with 6 picks in the top 100, which would be outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they have to give away a pick in this draft, they came in with 10. So if they need to move around a little bit, they've got some ammunition. Even if you're sitting at 58 natively, you could combine, 123 and a future third round pick to move up. If you felt like you needed to into the 60 range or 70 range or whatever. So there's a lot of opportunity to move around.
Yeah. So, okay. Now we're on to pick 83, which is a native pick for Seattle. I went linebacker finally, which is a position that I came in, even though they just signed Bobby, and I get that. I wanted a starting linebacker out of this draft, and I went with DeMarvion Overshone out of Texas, which isn't necessarily that starting linebacker. Has all the athleticism, all the traits, but is more of a project, is a guy that you've got to teach a little bit in terms of how to play coverage, because he comes forward, makes tackles, very aggressive, and does that stuff well. Not necessarily as good in coverage as you need in the NFL. And so I think he's more of a project, but when you've got your 2 starters already on the roster, you can have him be the third one and get half a season of practice before you get him on the field. I think that could matter quite a bit for him. And with his athleticism and speed, I felt like it was worth taking a shot on him and getting a potential like high end player. So that's where I went at 83.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, he's a little undersized.
Mm-hmm.
At 6'2", 229. Where do you see him playing? Is he going to come off the edge for you? I mean, he's got the 4.56 speed and a little bit of length to him.
I see him being in the same role that Cody Barton was in last year. And he's an interior lineman, but not the big thumper interior lineman. He's the other interior lineman, the one that's more of a coverage guy. Which you go, I just said he's not as great in coverage, but his athleticism, size, speed say that he can cover. We just have to teach him how. But he's also got that aggressiveness, ability to come up. He's just undersized for that. So he gives you kind of some scheme diversity in that he can do both things for you. And I just don't think he's ready to play right now. Otherwise, he would have gone earlier in the draft. But at 83, you got a potential long-term starter, and you don't need him to play week 1.
Interesting. So at 83, I get to the point of the draft where I start thinking about, linebackers, safeties, running backs, wide receivers, etc. And one of my favorite players of the draft is Roschon Johnson. He's usually available somewhere in the 120 range, but sometimes he goes much earlier than that, sometimes later. There was one player on the board though that I wasn't expecting to be there. Most of the time he's gone in the 60, 70 range, and that's Zach Charbonnet, the running back out of UCLA at 83. I thought was the best player on my board. Owen Papo was sitting there, Chase Brown, Jair Brown, the safety, DJ Turner, the corner, Emil Ikiora Jr., the interior offensive lineman out of Alabama. Hendon Hooker was there. I would have probably traded him had I not got CJ Stroud at 5. But Zach Charbonnet offered me the best value, comes in immediately as number 2 running back on Seattle's roster. Great complementary running back to what we have, Ken Walker the third. And that running back room is set for the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, I like that pick, especially at that spot. That's good. Good value there. All right, so the next pick would be 123. And so there was a player available that I wasn't expecting to be available, and I kind of took him on a whim. Michael Wilson, the wide receiver out of Stanford. This is a guy who kind of been not on everyone's radar because Stanford was so bad this last year, but came into the Senior Bowl and just impressed everyone every single day he was there. And competent route running, speed, size, incredible catch radius. Like, how did Stanford get so little out of him? Well, that's because their offensive line and running game were trash and there were no other receivers. But he just really looked like he just made a lot of the Senior Bowl corners look bad. And for him to be there at 123 made so much sense. Now, I know that's the second wide receiver that I've picked up in this one, but Seattle's got two, and then there's really nothing after that. Maybe Tyreek Young develops into a guy, but with Wilson and Johnson, now you've got your 3 and your 4 and your potential, your high end, low floor guy in Young. There's your wide receiver room, and I think it's a massive upgrade overall in giving Geno better weapons.
Yeah, I like that actually. Okay. So at 123, there were a number of players, including DeMarvin Overshown was sitting there at one, ended up going at 124. Yeah, crazy. Some linebacker guys, more running backs, a few tight ends. But I saw a guy on here that's not going to be ready to play this year, but showed amazing tenacity at the combine and kind of hides and stashes the pick for a year and is available in 2024. And Andrew Voorhees, the interior offensive lineman out of USC, a really good player, can play guard for you, could line up at center. I suppose I've already got that handled. I've got O'Torrance. What this is really is a hedge for our left guard situation. Contract is up with Lewis in 2024. Andrew Voorhees is just a guy that I've stashed on the roster, probably start the year for sure on IR, since he just blew out his knee, the ACL, at the combine. And so you go ahead and you sit on him, and he comes in and competes in 2024.
Yeah, he went out there with a swollen knee and a lot of pain and sat down and did the bench and blew everyone else away. It was freaking crazy. I didn't even realize that at the time that he had done that. You actually told me on the show that he had blown out his knee the day before, and then I went back and kind of relooked, and I'm like, oh yeah, I should have caught that. But with all the pain and everything that he was in after blowing out his knee,
that shows grit. And Seattle would love that.
Yeah, he went out there and just dominated the other offensive and defensive linemen at the on the bench press, which I freaking love that. I love that as a player, and I love that pick. So that's a great one. So now we're down to 151. Seattle has 2 picks, 151 and 154, right next to each other.
Yep.
So not a lot. When they get to 151, that's a spot where they could trade because they know they've got another pick sooner. I didn't. I stayed there. Player that you already mentioned, and you mentioned being there in the 120s. I got there at 151. Roschon Johnson, running back out of Texas.
Nice.
Big, huge, powerful back, runs people over. Excellent between the tackles guy. Lots of tread on the tires because he was second to Bijan Robinson on that roster. But just what Seattle needs. They need a big running back that can run between the tackles and get that. It's 3rd and 1, and you can get it every time. They need that kind of back, and that's what Johnson is.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, again, good value. Love that pick. If he's there at that point in the draft, I think Seattle is probably going to hop on that, to be completely honest. I think that, our running back room is fairly light at this point. We haven't made any veteran additions. Our cap space dictates that we're not going to really add anything except for maybe a veteran minimum. At 151, I still needed some help on the defensive line. Quite a bit of help. The draft kind of got away from me. We still need some interior help, obviously at the edge or 3-tech, as well. And so I went with Byron Young, the defensive lineman out of Alabama. At this point in the draft, it's tremendous value. I don't think that he lasts that long in the draft. I think he's going to go in the 100 range probably, but he's sitting there at 151. He's a guy that's 293 pounds, had a tremendous combine, really stood out there, made a name for himself, and good program at Alabama. Seattle was out Alabama's facilities to kind of scope out the quarterback class and some other players. I'm sure he was looked at. Seattle would be happy to have Byron Young out of Alabama coming out of the draft for sure.
Yeah. So moving on, we're looking at pick 154, the other one. And again, I got a player that you mentioned earlier as a potential in the 130s. I doubled up linebacker. This is to give you an idea of, I knew that this team needed to get linebackers out of this draft because I don't trust Bush as a guy even for this year. I mean, I know they signed him to a mostly guaranteed deal, but I would prefer that they upgrade that spot. And Bobby's only around for one more year, and you've got Brooks coming back from an injury. I'd love to see them get another guy that can play there. And so I went with Overshone, who's a project, at 83, and then I doubled up the position at 154 with Owen Popo. Out of Auburn, the guy is undersized. I get that. He's 6 foot 225, but the guy's got 4.39 speed.
Yeah.
Just absolute elite sideline to sideline speed.
He's going to be a special teams dynamo, really.
Yeah.
Too.
And that's the other thing is he can be your guy as, a special teams star while waiting in the wings for his opportunity. And then he'll come on and play and you'll love him. Even though he's a little undersized, he's so twitchy athletically and plays with just so much. He just tackles people, very sure tackler, wraps up, but also hits with a lot of power, even though, his size, like I think he's a guy that's going to he's going to start out as a backup and a special teams player. He's going to be hard to keep off the field.
Yeah. Interesting. So I doubled up on the defensive line back to back, 151 and 154. Moro Ojamo, the defensive lineman out of Texas, basically the same player as Byron Young at 292 pounds, very athletic. But, when you take a look at the roster, Shelby Harris is no longer there. Dre Jones, we signed, obviously. But behind that, there's just not a lot. Darrell Taylor is going to be behind that at times, moving inside, but a little undersized for that spot, moving up on the line of scrimmage. We haven't brought back Puna Ford. And so I think that we needed to kind of infuse this spot with some young talent. And both these guys are able to make the roster there and likely go a little earlier, I think, in the draft. But he was too talented at that point to pass on him.
Yeah. And Quentin Jefferson is also no longer on the roster. So there is going to be some moving around there. They need other bodies. They just do. So I like that pick too. The next pick there, I think we're on native picks.
198. Yeah.
198. And then I've got 228. So, which is one I picked up in my trade. But other than that, it's native picks here. I went offensive line with Ryan Hayes. The guy's a little undersized at 298 pounds. But to me, when I looked at this, I see a guy that can play 5 positions. He's long enough to play tackle. He is stout enough to play guard, moves well enough to play center. He's kind of that jack of all trades, master of nothing. But those guys have value on a roster because you can, have one less offensive lineman suit up when you're limited to, 46 guys. And so having him there, it's a value pick as far as like roster value, but not necessarily like, oh, this guy's a high end starter. I just like him as a backup at the fact that he can probably back up 5 positions.
Yeah. Interesting. So I had already picked Quentin Johnson at 26. But at the back end of the roster, I'm looking for athletes, guys that can make the roster. Our wide receiver room needs some infusion of talent, even if it's guys that are coming off the practice squad week in, week out, guys that are competing for that 5th, 6th spot, as well as special teams. So I went with Bryce Ford Wheaton out of West Virginia, bigger receiver with a lot of speed, great upside, just needs to kind of integrate his route running to the NFL level. And at 198, I took a shot.
Yeah. So, and then at 228, which is a throw-in pick for with my trade down in round one, I tripled up on linebacker, and this time I went with a guy that has the size more so than the other two. The other two are a little undersized, but Yasir Abdullah, 6'1", 237, has the size to play inside, 4.47 speed. Is pretty dang good for a linebacker. And the reason why he's falling to this point is that teams have to figure out, is he a outside rusher or is he a linebacker? And he's got the athleticism to do both. He's got the size kind of to do both. But I don't think he has the bend to get around the edge as an outside guy. I like him as an inside guy because he plays really he plays big, and he gets in there. He'll mix it up with tight ends, pretty good in coverage. I think that, again, he's going to be a special team standout if he's on the roster. He's also a guy that might slip through to the practice squad, but then get called up if they need a guy. I see long-term potential starter there. Now, does he ever live up to that? I don't know, but you're taking a guy at 228 in round 7. But there's enough there that you could see, this is a guy that may turn into something. And that's why I went there, even though it was a triple pick. But when you've got 13 picks in the draft, you can take some luxury picks like that.
That's very true. And you're looking for athletic upside as well as special teams contributions at that point in the draft. You attack the position. Yeah, I can't fault you for that. It was horrible last year. You weren't going to let that happen again this year. Native pick 237. A lot of people didn't realize that we had this pick. This was a pick that didn't convey to Houston in the John Reed trade that happened, I don't know, almost 2 years ago this fall. And so I don't blame people for not remembering it. But we've got 237. I went with interior defensive lineman, nose tackle Gerard Clark out of Coastal Carolina. Just a big body guy at 334 pounds, 6'3", short, stout kind of player, but has long limbs at 82-inch wingspan. He's just a 2-gap space eater. He's not going to offer you any inside penetration, getting the quarterback or anything like that. Just strictly a nose tackle. Got to stop the run. The possibility of a guy like this making the roster, even at 237 on the pick, just because of the lack of depth that we currently have on the roster.
Yeah, I like it. And especially given, the only true nose tackle they've got on the roster right now is Brian Monet, coming off an injury and was okay, certainly not great when he was healthy, and just getting another big body that can push him for playing time / a roster spot is great. And I think you've got a guy that can do that. All right. So we got one more pick at, where are we at? We're at 237. And I doubled up at running back and went with Evan Hull out of Northwestern.
It's a good pick right there.
5'10", 209, another downhill runner, a guy that gets upfield, plays with a lot of power, isn't the sharp, isn't like the most explosive guy, but can read blocks on those stretch zone plays, cut up inside, one cut and go kind of guy. But the goal here is to get him moving downhill as soon as possible and let him run over guys. Doesn't fumble the ball, pretty smart as far as that kind of stuff. Does a reasonable job as in blitz pickup, and just as a guy that's going to come in and be another guy in the running back room, because you've only got 2 currently. And yes, I already picked up one earlier, but this would be your 4th running back, and a guy that can play a lot of special teams and give you something down the road if injuries hit this position again.
I think it's great. He showed up at the Senior Bowl, made a name for himself, had a good combine, Keith, 214 pounds, ran a 4.45 40. At that point in the draft, you already drafted Rashawn Johnson. So this is just another guy to add to the pile. We lost Homer in the offseason. We lost Penny in the offseason. DJ Dallas is there. Yeah, and that's it. As far as reserves are concerned. And so to add another body in there, I think that makes a lot of sense at that point. So good drafts overall. I was happy. I ended up with 6 picks in the top 100. I think if John Schneider comes out of the draft with 6 picks in the top 100, Seahawks fans are going to be excited. I know there's a trade back there, but I think it's justified in this. You come in with 10. I do see Seattle moving around. Maybe we come out of this draft with 8 picks overall, and John moves up a few different times to kind of make sure he gets the guy he's targeting. They could come out of the draft with 13. You mentioned you've got 13 picks, right? It's possible. Now, Seattle doesn't have a lot of cap room, but those lower end picks after pick 100 aren't really going to cost anything on the roster. And so you can go ahead and do that and come out and load up on players that you've really identified, especially in the pick 200s. Those are kind of priority free agents, guys that you're really identifying that you want to have before anyone else has a chance to get them. So good drafts overall, I think.
Yeah. And you're saying about the cap space, like 13 picks, like if you're a team that's really short on draft space, the way you fill out your roster is a lot of mid to late round draft picks or undrafted free agents, because those fill out your roster without costing you hardly anything. So that's why I decided to go in that strategy, so they could get their numbers up to 90 without spending a lot of salary cap space they don't have. So
yeah, the reason that I dropped back from 26, I picked up a 4th round pick in 2024, which I think is going to come in handy next year. It's a strong draft class. I also picked up pick number 58. So I dropped 6 spots, picked up a, late 2nd rounder, which has tremendous value. I ended up picking a player in Julius Brents, who I think has the ability to start on this roster. And so trading back is I think a viable option in this draft, because the middle rounds, the picks in between the 2nd round and the 4th round are just really going to be players that can come in and help your roster right away.
Yeah. And so, and just the same idea, in my draft, I could have drafted Gonzalez at 5 at cornerback, but by trading down to 11, I got Joey Porter Jr., which I don't think is a huge drop off, but it also let me get Adebayo at 41, who is a very high end prospect as a 3-4 defensive end. Yeah.
Fun.
So it's worthwhile.
Yeah. So what did you think overall of your draft? You walk away pretty darn happy as a Seahawks fan?
Oh, I do. I like the fact that I got the defensive line help. I got linebacker help. I got center help. And then, the cornerback, wide receiver at the top of the draft just as like bonus. Overall, I'm really happy with this draft. I think I've got 6 potential starters. Like maybe not year 1, but by year 2. I think I've got 6 potential starters here.
And you just punted. I mean, we talked about it ahead of time, and thank you for following the rules, but you punted on the complete quarterback class in this draft.
Yes, I did.
Which is interesting.
Because that's what the rule was.
The rule was not an early quarterback.
Yes, and you picked one at 5.
Well, I set up my friend. This would be known as my CJ Stroud draft for sure. Everyone else is just kind of like fluff, but you come out of the draft with your future quarterback in CJ Stroud, and then Quentin Johnson, or Cyrus Torrance, John Michael Schmitz, Julius Brents, Zach Charbonnet. The only thing that made me nervous about my draft was I waited, and the way that the draft fell, my defensive interior line picks weighted, and I'm not exactly confident in that, but other than that, I was happy.
Yeah. They got Mozzie Smith.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Like John Michael Schmitz and Mozzie Smith would make anybody's draft, I think.
Yeah. If you get those 2 guys in a single draft, you've got your nose tackle or 3 tech of the current and future, and your starting center for the next 10 years, you've done really well. And then you throw in an elite cornerback and a wide receiver prospect that's going to make
I know
how many defensive coordinators lose sleep. Like, that's just a bonus.
Yeah, I know. Both of us kind of walked out of this draft with 4 or 5 starters, which is crazy, and that's, again, knocking it out of the park, depending on how they turn out. It's interesting. You watched last year's draft. Seattle had tremendous success, but really most drafts are not like that. And even when you have a pick at the very top, I noticed, Seaside Joe came out with a little article about the Seahawks pick or the picks in the drafts at the positions that we're drafting over the last 5 years, 5 players at those spots, and half of them are washed out, already. And it's just difficult. You just do the best you can with the information that you have at that moment to make the good picks. And the rest is just kind of a crapshoot. It really is. Even CJ Stroud, he looks great as a prospect, really does. But there's no guarantees that he is a guy that can come in and immediately have a great effect on this league.
Yeah, I mean, look at Zach Wilson, taken number 2 overall, and he's pretty much out of a job, and is not viewed as a potential starter in the NFL anymore.
Trey Lance.
Trey. I mean, that has a lot to do with injury, but
but nonetheless,
he's got this year. This year, because of Brock Purdy's injury, Trey Lance has this season to come in and prove he belongs.
So I got a question for you. Well, maybe we'll save it for the next show, strategy show. I had a question regarding the type of players you're looking for in this draft if you're a Seahawks GM. Yeah. Just based on where the roster is at. So, okay, let's get out of here. You can find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform, please. And when you do, hit the subscribe button. We've got our own YouTube channel as well. Seahawks Playbook podcast on YouTube. And again, please subscribe, and that would really be helpful. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.